I'm putting this video out on UFC Fighter Pay now because a media member called me on Friday night. I was driving. He asked if we could talk. He's from one of the towns that we're going to do an event early next year. He said, "We want to talk about your upcoming event." I said, "Okay." 1 minute into the call, he does a full 360 and starts talking about UFC Fighter Pay and starts talking about how everybody is underpaid in the UFC compared to the other big promotions. And I said I have to disagree with you because like we're arguing, and I said you don't have your facts straight. This is what I do all day, so I know the numbers, and you're off. I said Bellator in 2022 did 18 live events, one did 28 live events, but 13 of them was road to one, so that doesn't count. He said, why don't they count? I said, well, even on the regional scene, 75% of our champions make more money than the guys on road entry level guys that road to one. And I said PFL did 18 events in 2022. 8 of them are PFL Challenger Series, and again, 75% of our champions make more than the entry level guys on PFL Challenger Series. So I said, even, and he was saying that Bellator entry level contracts are better than UFC entry level contracts. I told him Bellator entry level contracts are 40% of UFC entry level contracts. Go do a fact check if you need to. I said a Bellator entry level contract is the same kind of pay as contender series contract, and that's before you make the UFC. Even if you lose, the pay is the same as what you would get on a Bellator entry level contract. So I said, like, you gotta get your facts straight. And then he was going on and on. I go, what about the reinvestment into the sport, right? So that's why boxing is such a mess. It's been 50 years. There is no reinvestment into the sport. And in MMA, the only company who's really reinvesting into the sport is the UFC. I told him, what about the PI? That's tens of millions of dollars just to buy the land and build the PI in Vegas. Then you got other locations in China, coming up in Mexico. What about all the staffing? I said, did you know that every single fighter on the roster can go to the UFC PI and get food? They can write a diet plan, they can give them the food, and it's all free of charge. I go fact check it, right? I said 10 days out from your fight, you can go in there, they blood test you, they test your blood, make sure you're cutting weight properly, everything is safe. I go, what about the investment into the, like, reinvestment into the sport for safety? And I'll go for a fighter, just that food, that counts a lot. You're talking about like 5,000, 10,000, that all adds up. And I said, here's another thing, right? I go, at the height of the pandemic in 2020, December, UFC Fight Pass went and extended deals to 14 promotions to basically, that's when nobody wanted to do any business. Everybody was going broke. That's at the height of pandemic in December 2020, right? So basically saving the sport on the regional scene in different areas. And I told him, take our promotion as an example, right? The longest running, 78 events over 14 years in Canada. We've had $1,900,000 in athletes pay over those 13 years, right? And I told him we can open our books to any media member and they can see that. From 2010 to 2020, before we were on Fight Pass, and then from 2020 to 2023, athlete pay increased 220% between 2020 to 2023 in that time. And 60% of what we get from Fight Pass has gone towards fighter pay. That's why it got increased. So basically, they're reinvesting into what about the 220% fighter increase on the regional scene? Where is that coming from, right? So it's not just taking, hey, fighter pay without having your facts. There's a lot of variables, and 95% of the media members don't know that because they're not in the business, right? You might see the fighter pay in Nevada Athletic Commission, right? And how many, but there's a lot of other money being put back into the sport. And one other key thing is, if you take out the PFL Challenger Series and take out one road to one events, and you count the Bellator, One, and PFL accumulated those three. They don't do all three together as many events as UFC in 1 year. The thing is, everybody needs all those promotions. They're good promotions, but for media members to come and say they're doing better, well, they don't keep the fighters busy. We've had a lot of guys go, they don't do enough events. When you're in the UFC, if you're healthy, you will get your 4 fights a year if you're accepting the fights, right? And the roster, there's a lot of guys being employed. So there's a big difference. You can't take, and then he brought up the Mike Perry. He was reading a clip from some big media site from like two weeks ago and saying, look at Mike Perry, he couldn't sign. He said he wouldn't re-sign with the UFC, he considered it, but he had to take a pay cut. But with bare knuckle, he's making a lot more money. And I said, you're comparing apples to oranges. Mike Perry is the highest paid guy in that entire sport. Okay, so that's the one case that he would have to take a pay cut. But if he was to come to the UFC, he wouldn't even be in the top 10 when you factor in the pay-per-view points and stuff, right? So the only thing I said when he asked me, he says, well, do you think bare knuckle is a better fit for Mike Perry than UFC? I said yes. So this guy's going to take that for clickbait, just put that up there and saying I said it when we talked about all this other stuff. But yeah, for Mike Perry, the one guy, the highest paid guy in the sport, in a different sport, yes, that makes sense for him. But to come and say that he had to take a pay cut to come back to the UFC, well, he wouldn't even be like the top 10 paid guys in the UFC. Those are like facts. Like everybody could check it if you do your research and homework. So there's a good, like all those promotions are needed, but people are saying that the fighter pay in UFC is low. No, like you might not like me for it, but it's not. Compared to the whole sport, when you factor in everything else, it's more than fair. And go check your facts.